Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 30th and tonight's movie is Possum. Normally to find movies for Horror Nights I just do a whole lot of Google searches, but this might be the first one that legit just organically came up in conversation. I was on a Discord server and I said that Hereditary was the scariest movie I'd ever seen, which it still is, and somebody else asked, have you seen Possum? And no, I hadn't even heard of it. But I did make a mental note of it. And here we are. This is a 2018 horror movie from the UK about a man who goes back to his childhood home and needs to face some things. Wikipedia describes the main character as a disgraced children's puppeteer, and I don't even want to think about the things you have to do in order to be disgraced from that job. For some reason, I'm getting sort of Babadook vibes from the trailer of this movie, but whether or not it's as good as the Babadook is yet to be seen. This movie really seems like a wild card. This could be really amazing, this could be completely horrible, and it could be anywhere in between. I don't even have a guess. Let me go give it a watch. This was a very interesting movie. Interesting and also just plain old weird. I'm giving Possum an 8 out of 10. There is a lot of this movie that is done really well, but overall it's not very fun to watch. And I think you could hear in my voice how excited movies like Gonjiam Haunted Asylum or Last Shift made me in those videos. This one is kinda joyless, sort of like how The Lighthouse was. But unlike The Lighthouse, this might be one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure it's the scariest movie of the month. It turns out that my casual comparison to the Babadook from the trailer was actually a lot more accurate than I thought. The monster in this movie, just like the Babadook, is a monster from a children's story that was written by the main character. And, also just like the Babadook, once you have this monster, you're not getting rid of it. The monster in this movie is the eponymous Possum. Possum is not a possum at all. It's a puppet that the main character Phil created, and this thing is, I think, the scariest doll/puppet I've ever seen in a movie. This thing is ugly as sin and horrifying. It's like this, creepy doll head on top of, 8 hairy legs. And the story talks about how it eats children in their beds. I can understand why he was immediately blacklisted and shunned from performing for children just by showing them that thing. Philip's goal in this movie is to get rid of Possum, and that's not as easy as it sounds. He tries dumping it, sinking it, burning it, and nothing works. It just keeps coming back. However, considering how similar this plot is to the Babadook, it made me wonder, is Possum really coming back, or is this guy just going insane? You can see that he's at a very bad time in his life. He's at his mental breaking point for a lot of it. The horror in this movie almost entirely revolves around Possum, and they handled this very well. There's not a lot of jump scares, there's not a lot of big, loud, scary things. Most of the times, you don't even see Possum move. It's basically the weeping angel concept. It only moves when they're not looking. And I am pretty good with jump scares at this point. I've seen so many horror movies that I can kind of figure out the flow of it and when the jump scares are going to happen. But there is the one jump scare in this movie that got me so badly. That might be the worst a jump scare has gotten me since Butterfly Kisses. So, fittingly enough, I think I kind of would put Possum in the same category as Hereditary. It's not quite as well done as that movie is, but both of them are movies for the horror aficionado. They're not a lot of fun, especially towards the end, but they're both just so masterfully made. Though if you get easily spooked, I think I would recommend watching something else. Now I want to talk about a few spoilers. From the beginning, I think the symbolism of this movie is kind of apparent. You can tell that Philip has had a traumatic past. There's a lot of things in his past that he just doesn't like to think about, doesn't want to deal with. And Possum is the manifestation of his childhood trauma. He can't just get rid of it, he needs to face it head on if he wants it to leave him alone. Now, whether Possum is actually a paranormal entity taking over this puppet, or it's just a visual representation of his psychosis, I don't know. Once again, it's like the Babadook, we never get a straight answer in that regard. He's apparently staying at his uncle's house, and you can tell that he doesn't really like his uncle. On the uncle's part, there's a lot of taunting, a lot of mean-spirited teasing. Also of note, the first scene of the movie is Phil on a train, and he sees a group of high school boys, and he makes eye contact with one of them and tries to talk to him, but the kid just kind of like gives short answers and walks away quickly, which is understandable. Philip is pretty creepy. That kid goes missing pretty soon in the movie, and considering the fact that he's just walking around aimlessly with a bag, and he was also caught like loitering outside of a school, it makes sense that the police suspect him. And that brings me to the jump scare that legitimately got me. I won't even front. He goes into this one room in his uncle's house that he never has entered before in the movie, and it's the charred remains of, I think, his parents' bedroom. There was talk of a fire and him being an orphan. And there's this really long scene, and I was expecting Possum to show up, and by that point they established the way that Possum appears. There might be a sting, but there's never going to be a sting and a cut to Possum at the same time. It kind of shows up quietly. So I was completely caught off guard when some masked man comes barreling in out of nowhere. It turns out that besides his parents dying, the main source of his trauma is his abusive uncle. He definitely beat him as a kid and is implied to have done even more unspeakable things. It starts out with Philip like regressing into a more childlike state of helplessness, but eventually he starts to fight back and is able to kill the uncle. And, big surprise, it turns out the uncle was the one who kidnapped that schoolboy. The last shot of the movie just shows Phil sitting down with Possum in his lap, and he's not really doing anything, he's just sitting there. I'm pretty sure the implication is that now that his trauma had been faced, Possum isn't going to bother him anymore. So I guess, strictly speaking, this movie had a happier ending than the Babadook did. Anyway, while I don't think this movie is bad, it's amazing at what it does. I think that the Babadook is significantly better. But if you really liked the Babadook and wanted to see a movie that's similar to it, Possum is out there. So anyway, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow for Halloween night.